This is the history of the MiG-15. It's me. You're watching this channel. And today we are going to talk about one of the most numerous Soviet aircraft from the jet age, the Mikoyan MiG-15. It was one of the first jets to see combat. It was the first swept-wing jet to see combat. It was also the first jet to score an aerial victory against another jet, so it has quite a few superlatives to its name. It was developed in the late 40s under the leadership of Artem Mikoyan, and it was based on the MiG-9, which was itself based on the Lavokin La-5, famous Soviet fighter from World War II. The MiG-15 was designed as a twin-engine supersonic fighter with swept wings, and it featured an extremely powerful engine for the time. The VD-7 engine, which produced more power than any other piston engine that the Soviets had at the time. Now, interestingly, this engine was not just powerful, but also very reliable. It did have a tendency to catch fire when it was shut down, but that was nothing compared to the reliability offered by piston engines. And I mean, just listen to this thing. This is a factory test of the engine, and you can hear just how loud it is. Now, this aircraft was being developed alongside another design from Lavokin, the La-15. These two aircraft were essentially competing for a place in the military. But the MiG-15 was much more advanced. It had a better engine, it had swept wings, and it also had a much more powerful armament in the form of two 23mm Nuttleman cannons. Now, speaking of those cannons, there was a lot of debate during the development as to what the armament should be. Originally, the plan was to arm the aircraft with four 23mm cannons, but that was eventually reduced to two. And then there was the question of where to put them. One of the ideas was to put them in the nose, which would be the easiest. But that would also make them rather ineffective, since the nose was quite narrow. Another option was to put them in the wings, like they did with the Lagrange LG-3. But that would reduce the internal fuel capacity, which was already pretty small. In the end, they decided to go with a placement under the wings, which made it the first jet fighter to have underwing guns. Now, because of the relatively small size of the aircraft, they could only fit small 60-round magazines, which meant that pilots had to conserve their ammo. As soon as they started firing, they had to move, and not just move, but perform aerobatics while moving, which made the weapon system very difficult to use. Now, the prototype first flew in December of 1947, and it entered service in 1948, which was a record time for aircraft development. It was immediately deployed to Korea. A total of 186 of these aircraft were sent there, and they arrived just in time to face the latest American jets, the F-86 Sabre. Now, the early encounters were not good for the pilots of the MiG-15. They could get within range of the enemy aircraft without getting detected by their radar. And if they got close enough to fire, the F-86 Sabres could just outclimb them and leave them behind. And so the first 6 MiG-15 pilots were shot down without managing to even fire a single shot. But after some training and practice, they started to find ways to use their aircraft effectively. The turning radius of the MiG-15 was smaller than that of the Sabre, so they could turn inside of them and catch them off guard. Also, the high altitude of the Korean War meant that the Sabres had to fly at lower speeds, which made them easier targets. So slowly but surely, the pilots of the MiG-15 started to rack up victories. In fact, the first jet versus jet dogfight resulted in the downing of an F-86 Sabre by a MiG-15 flown by Korean pilot No Kum-jong. The Americans were taken completely by surprise. They had never encountered such a maneuver in all of their training. As the war progressed, the MiG-15 became the main workhorse of the Soviet Air Force. A total of 18 versions of the aircraft were built, most of them being variants with different engines or different weapon systems. But there was one major variant that stood out from the rest: the MiG-15 Biz. It was essentially a stretched version of the original with a longer nose and a longer, wider wingspan. And it was designed specifically to counter the new threat that the US had deployed in Korea, the F-86 Sabre. The Bis was faster, had a longer range, and also carried more weapons. It also had a more powerful radar and an improved engine. However, the production of the Bis was halted after the death of Stalin. He was a big proponent of the project, and he pushed forward both the Bis and the development of the even more advanced MiG-17, but after his death, the funding for these projects was cut, and the military was forced to focus on cheaper designs that were easier to produce in larger numbers. The MiG-15 continued to serve until the 1960s. It was used by Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, and Romania. And it was operated by China as well. In fact, it was the Chinese who scored the last aerial victory using the MiG-15 against an F-86 Sabre in 1962. Interestingly, the Chinese also used the MiG-15 in the 1979 war with Vietnam. Now, the Vietnamese were flying the Soviet-built Yak-23, which was a very capable interceptor. It had a powerful engine, it had a large airframe, and it had an APG-17 radar, which was the same radar that was used on the American F-4 Phantom. The only problem was that the Yak-23 didn't have a gun. It had an onboard radar, but no gun. So if it managed to lock on to a target, it would have to use its rockets or its bombs, which were not exactly precise. And so the Vietnamese pilots resorted to using the guns of the MiG-15s as their own. They would simply fly behind the MiG-15s and follow their lead.
Wow.
If the radar of the Yak-23 locked onto a target, the MiG-15 would fire its guns, and then the Yak-23 would come in behind and drop its rockets. Now, the MiG-15 wasn't just used as a fighter. There was a naval version of it called the MiG-15 UTI, which was used as a carrier-based fighter, and there was a trainer version as well. The UBI was actually used by the Soviet Navy until 1989. There were a total of around 18,000 of these aircraft built, which makes it the most numerous jet aircraft from the Soviet Union, and it remained the mainstay of the Soviet Air Force for nearly 2 decades. As for the development of the design, it led directly to the MiG-17, which was a further development with an even more powerful engine and swept wings that could be set at various angles. If you enjoyed the video, check out my others about aviation history and the technology of flight. And if you want to support the channel, consider becoming a member. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.